Welcome to Uber Cube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uber Bear, and I'm joined by my other host,
May, also known as Magic.
Hey, so we've got an interesting topic today. And I joke about this. All of our topics are interesting. May, would you agree? I feel that they're all interesting. But this
I don't
one,
know.
I
think our mud episode wasn't particularly interesting.
Yeah, and also when you talked about that whole conversation we had about Rubik's Cubes too, wasn't the, would you say the Quirk multiverse? That one, I didn't feel like that one was the best that we could produce. But always getting better. But every episode happens to be the freshest one. We say that one is the most interesting. All right. So recently, Stu and we put a conversation out into the, I guess, the social media verse, as we'll refer to it. And this time, we decided we're going to do something a little different. Last time was the Discords and the Facebooks and some Twitters. But this time I decided to go on Reddit and pose the same question. And we thought that that first episode was kind of a closing point, right? But we were really interested to see that Reddit itself just had this plethora of ideas that formed around the following question. What card, when added to your cube environment, essentially broke it, or a game, and was cut immediately post the draft? We want to know. Happy cubing, as we like to say here at UberCube, right, May?
Mm-hmm.
Happy cubing. All right, so before we go any further down this journey, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube. May, what are you drinking today?
I am actually being responsible since it is still pretty early in the morning, drinking some jasmine tea.
Yeah, and I'm being less responsible, but I've got an interesting one here. I've been secretly hiding this one from you, and I'll have to put a picture of this one in the show notes. It's Prairie Artisan Spicy Pickle Monster, as it's referred to. It is a pickle sour
monster.
Yes, and the can literally looks like Thing from the Deep, the Magic card coming up, and it's a giant pickle.
Hilarious.
It is Jaws, but a pickle. But yeah, let's go ahead and crack them open. And yeah, before I even do that, I went to a pub last night. I tried this beer out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is delicious for anybody that loves dill pickle flavors. Let's go. All right. So reiterate the question. What card, when added to your cube environment, essentially broke it or game and was cut immediately post the draft? And this is part 2 of the first conversation. We're going to start out actually with May, because we were pre-gaming as we do, and I asked May, hey, do you have any cards that pop off your hands? And within a millisecond, she answered. May, what do you got for us?
It's Heirloom Blade. Easily, it's Heirloom Blade.
What was the context? What was the cube? And how did that really play out for you? What was the brokenness of that card?
I will also add the additional context of what Heirloom Blade is and does, because not a lot of people know this card exists.
And they should.
3-mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +3/+1. Whenever the equipped creature dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card that shares a creature type with it, and put that card into your hand, and the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order with equipped 1. So aside from the fact that it equips 1, gives +3/+1, yeah, sure, great, that's wonderful, whatever. But the part that pushed it over in my environment was the fact that my environment cares about typal stuff. It cares about subtypes. It cares about having like elves, goblins, wizards, warriors, whatever. And Heirloom Blade rewards you even further for playing those decks, not even counting the changeling cards. The fact that you can grab changeling cards or equip changelings with this and just grab anything pushed it way over the edge in my environment, and it had to go.
Yeah, I can see that. I actually run it in Uber Bear's Horror Cube, and we haven't had any negative impact as of yet, because I do run, as you said, the subtypes, matters types. I run vampires, werewolves, etc. And anything could wear this amazing piece of equipment. So, but what I do like about it is it lets you filter your library, lets you get your next threat. It's really cool. I also run it in my powered vintage environment, and a lot of times you run it just because the stats alone, the fact that you reveal cards until you hit your next targets of a similar type, that's gravy. What's interesting about this card, and we've had this conversation about it prior, when you're doing that, you're essentially revealing information to your opponent. You're rifling through your deck, and what if you didn't have a target, is what I'm saying in so many words. That was the argument behind this card. Is it value add if you're just going to now, I'm playing against May, and let's just say hypothetically, and I know it's an odd one, I'm running one human, a Thraben Inspector. Shout out to J-Bro. And it dies. But let's just say for whatever reason, I'm not running another human. And I know that's probably just way out there in the stars. And I start flopping over. I'm now showing May my deck strategy. And I just found that's such a juxtaposition with this card design. But it's so powerful. I mean, I absolutely love it.
I hope your opponent likes memory games.
Yeah. So can you get a pen and paper out and start
my
jotting?
library.
You're like, sideboard in bribery now. But yeah, I just thought it was such an interesting card. I think that's a great story to share, that how a card like that I run kind of generically in a lot of cubes in certain environments, because as we say, context matters. And as we go through these discussions, context will 100% matter. These aren't going to be powered max cubes today. Whereas in the previous episode, we hit a lot of people that were, the conversation came up. It was cards like bribery, moat, euro or euro. Euro, I talked about the economics conversation, or stuff like that, right? On that type of plane. But as we go through these cards, it's interesting to share the experiences of other curators with different environments, because as new curators come into the fold, it's good for them to, and Stu said this during our last episode, it's good for them to hear the negative aspect of some of these cards and how in certain environments they can be warping, and maybe we'll save them some trouble, right, May? I mean, yeah.
Power can be very contextual, and in the case of something like Heirloom Blade for your cube, it is a perfectly fine card, versus in a slower, dirtily, mid-range, grindy fest of the Fey Cube. It's just kind of, I'm just going to outgrind you and win. And we're going to explore a lot of the cards and suggestions that people have brought up that kind of fit in this category.
Yeah, and some of the things we talked about, it's like the time of the edition matters, right? You're going to hear a lot of people say, like, when I added card X, I took it out immediately, but later down the road, once my power leveled out, and or as we talked about in our Power on the Horizon episode, power creep is real, that maybe a card that felt really overpowered 5 years ago in said environment now seems kind of a wash, right? With all the... And we're seeing that with the Commander Legends set that's coming out, where they're doing a lot of downshifts, downgrades, and you're going to see people introducing very selectively cards that was, say, once a rare, now suddenly into a peasant environment. And it's going to be curious to see the feedback of people if it adds to this list, if suddenly they get more broken cards than they were planning on. Do you have any thoughts on that, May?
Yeah, downshifts and definitely reprints change what you have access to in your environment, and it is an important consideration when Wizards keeps making new products, and what's worth putting in your environment. It can power creep, and sometimes as things adjust, things that used to be too strong might be fine now, or counterintuitively, things that used to be too weak are now broken because a new card came out that just breaks it in half.
Yeah, some unknown synergy was unlocked, right? That's an interesting point as well, too. Well, let me ask you a question. As a curator, a well-known curator, and we talked about this before, over tinkering, how often do you allow a card to, do you cut it after a game if the experience was bad, or do you take that as a data point?
I do a 3-strike system. It's probably not the best system, but I remember us having the conversation of, if somebody calls me a horse once, then I'll just shrug it off. If somebody calls me a horse twice, then it's going to be like, okay, no, it's interesting. Call me a horse 3 times. All right, I'm a horse.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the problem that I experience oftentimes, one, I created this problem for myself. I lose count, but I think I have 8 cubes, right? And then amongst our group, we're probably hitting 20 cubes. So the horse idea, I want to use it. The problem is it used to be in the way back when Chris and I exclusively were the cube curators, right? So if we were going to announce we're going to cube, it was just me and Chris, aka Sandwich, bartering or bickering to see whose would come out first, right? And that was it. Now we've got so many draft environments that the playtesting, that is something I have observed in our group. So the horse idea that I want to use on, say, Uber Bear's Artifact Cube, I want to play it more often, but I have to fit into this rotation of my friend circle, and I can't just hog the spotlight. So I don't get the play reps. As a matter of fact, May, we're going over to our friend's house this evening. At least it's in the plan. And we said, hey, you guys want a cube? I originally announced it. So Nathan and all said, well, host, sure. Well, I immediately felt the need, like, hey, I need to draft Uber Bear's Horror Cube tonight. It's like I had to call dibs, right? Because of that circle of opportunity. And I want to get those play reps in. And I happen to know they enjoy that one more. But that makes the horse thing harder. I mean, May, how many cubes do you have in your group, your circle?
Nobody else runs cubes in my pod, so I don't have to compete with anybody.
Yeah, so your playtesting opportunity is a lot higher. My data capture, and I think Stu talked about this recently, it's very difficult. We were talking about the Fem Cube, right? And he mentioned that he wanted to play it more often. It's a matter of me like taking a ticket at the DMV at this point, right? That's kind of the nature of that. But as we go through these cards, that'll make sense. So for me, I think I have to be a little bit more on the spot with my cuts because I don't get the opportunity to do the 3 times over. I will
say that it is a case where the grass seems greener on the other side because, unfortunately, there have been cases where I probably should have stepped in and had a bit more of an immediate call of, hey, this card should probably go, like Fractured Sanity, that I've mentioned in several other of our episodes.
Yeah.
But that was a case of, this is really strong for a limited environment. It probably just needs to go, but I was giving it way too much time.
Because you wanted it to work on face value. I can respect that. Like the concept of what you're trying to do. We talked about during our mill and self-mill episode is that you made this cool little micro package of mill, and I can see where you wanted to grab onto cards. It had.
By the way,
yeah,
listen to our mill episode.
It's really good, right? And that's funny too. Little tangent number 3. I want you to do a tangent strike. But our good friend Chris Samet, she strongly dislikes Mill as a mechanic. And it was funny. We were talking recently, and he said to me, "Hey, I've listened to all your episodes, but I really don't want to listen to the Mill episode." And I'm like, so then I had to pitch it like a used car salesman. I'm like, but if you listen to this one, you get to listen to this one for free. And he's like, all right, fine, whatever. But yeah, so I'm still looking for his feedback on that one. I got another question for you, May.
Sure.
And it's very specific. Is it healthy to have certain, I guess, ration of power outliers in a cube environment, like intentional seeds?
Yes.
What would be the rationale behind that?
So I think that when it comes to cube curation, whatever your intentions are with your cube can determine how many outliers that you want to have, but also what outliers are doing can be important signposts for players or important ways to close the game because the games have to end. And you can see this in a lot of our environments where we have very strong outlier signposts specifically to push people into a certain lane or to encourage certain deck building decisions. So that way when people see it in a pack, they'll be like, oh, I want to build this because this is strong. It is something that I could use to win the game. And that is a good consideration. But sometimes a curator just wants to have a little bit more of an even power level and not have a bunch of outliers and wants every card in the pack to feel strong and feel equivalent and then really push their drafting ability. And sometimes it's just a matter of how close to, not sealed, retail limited do you want to get?
I would agree with that 100%. So let's go over an interesting card here, and then I'm going to give it context. The next card that we're going to focus on is Phyrexian Reclamation. For 1 swamp, you get an enchantment, and for 1 colorless in swamp, pay 2 life, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And the flavor text is what's really going to fill this story out. Death is no excuse to stop working. Apparently the Phyrexians they're not really unionized, and but so this is actually, we're going to be referencing our good friend, we joke with him all the time, Samich, and Samich, if you're listening, Omega Man's what you've got on Reddit here, but Samich, Chris, he's he's our curation expert in our group. I mean, he's the person that I lean on all the time to ask like cuts and all that. Well, this particular story, we went to our local pub, which is Oak City Brewing up the road, and Chris and I just did a draft of his Sultai 180 cube, which is designed for 4 players. It's kind of a micro cube. We were just doing kind of I forget if we did a Houseman draft or what, but it's graveyard matters. Graveyard synergies is the whole concept of this, right? So as this is coming around the circle, and I mean, he's got some bangers in there. At the time, he had Thassa's Oracle, which has been cut, and he alludes to in this little story that'll be in the show notes. I grabbed this Phyrexian Reclamation in a graveyard synergy cube. And oh man, the loops that I did. And it just didn't take but one match. And we talked about, you said a minute ago, horse once, horse twice, probably a horse. This was a horse like screaming out the gate going down the racetrack. I mean, he was like, "Then we get this out of here," and because I was laughing because I'm like, "I think I broke your cube, man," and it was just unbeatable. If it resolved, it just kept cycling. Even if someone targeted it, I would respond and just start hitting triggers, right, and getting my threats back.
It's a perfect case. Sorry for jumping in.
Go ahead.
But it is a perfect case of what we explained earlier of this card in a lot of environments would just be fine. It would be an okay card. But because it's a graveyard focused environment and you have lots of ways to fill your graveyard, use your graveyard, etc., this becomes a toolbox. This becomes an extension. Your graveyard, you could just pay 2 mana at any given point to extend your hand.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened here. And it was interesting too. Play a lot of Commander in our friend circle, and that's where the subjectivity matters when you're evaluating cards. In Commander, this is a pretty benign, almost expected card. Yes, you're going to do egregious things in that environment, but he was kind of said it in his notes. He expected it would be equally as safe and benign as it is in a Commander format when he put it into a very tightly woven 180 Sultai cube. So you can see where that, taking that context of this environment and that style of gameplay, and trying to transition into, as you said, a very specific environment, doing a very specific thing, but now multiple people are competing, it gave one person an advantage. And in this instance, it was me, and that card was done. He's donezo by the time he got home. I mean, he's already taken it out. There was no horse opportunity for calling out.
I will also add the interesting additional context for a card like this is that the smaller your cube, the more likely it is to come up. And when you have a microcube that's like 180 or so cards, that is when you are always going to see this card. It is always going to be relevant. There is absolutely no room for variation. It will come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've actually have an episode coming up very soon, looking into the future here, an episode on travel cubes where May is going to talk about that type of design element and how you can focus on that. But it's a shout out to a future episode, looking out for that one. I'm excited to release that one soon. In our last episode, just as a fast overview where Stu and I kind of covered it, we said before it came out with like moat and bribery. It was the usual suspects, right? Like all these cards that people said broke my environment. And for me, we had this giggle in the opening one. May, you got to listen to it. Erla Squirrel was the one that broke an environment for me, which I'm very proud of, actually. And then Kappa Cannoneer, Cauldron Complete, and Increasing Confusion. And we talked about this. So make sure you go back and check out part 1 of this episode. We actually didn't know there was going to be a part 2, but we got a lot of feedback from Reddit. So yeah, so I learned too, and we talk about that. And I think the takeaway before we go into this is context matters. Mm-hmm. It's the opportunity for curators to share their experiences, right? And that's what we want to do here at UberCube. And so that other people can look at their environments and decide if that card is right for them and basically evade those challenges, right, before they get into it, or at least hear the story of what made it broken. May, would you mind, we're going to move into the discussions by the community. Would you mind taking on this first one, please?
Sure. So this first one was brought up by Living End, and pretty sure that is an I. It's like living_end. But they brought up Old One Eye. It was insane for their environment. They had a lot of big mana decks, and I can see why it would be really, really strong. It is 5 and a green. It is 6 mana, not 5. Legendary creature Tyrannid, 6/6 with trample. Other creatures you control have trample, which already is really good. When it enters the battlefield, create another 5/5 green Tyrannid creature token. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you can discard 2 cards. If you do, return it from your graveyard back to your hand. So not only does this thing come down, make another 5/5 with trample,
yes,
it creates 11 points worth of damage immediately if it's not answered by the next turn. But it's also sticky for discarding cards to bring it back. Like, this is a built-in win con by itself, and I can see why it would break an environment in half if you can play it.
And yeah, so Living End, this kind of ties, this is a good starter point because I mentioned before, as we share our curator experiences, and I did respond to this on Reddit, I run a 180 thematic, and I labeled here a 480, I don't know why I said that, but I run a 180 Munson cube that's all metal, right? Jund metal. And I thought this art is metal as AF, right? And I wanted to put it in there because I'm looking for a top end. But I guess I got kind of hung up on the trample. Other creatures you control have trample. And maybe it makes a 5/5, but I think I just kind of quit looking at the card after a while. I'm like, yeah, that's metal, and I'm listening to like Metallic or whatever, and I sleeved it up, so it's in there right now. But I want to point out is after this conversation between you and I, and when we had this one, I am cutting this because I guess I overlooked. And that's kind of where this experience is, this tethered experience. I do run this in my powered vintage cube, and there it will stay. But this is not going to work in my 180 Munson Lords of Metal cube, where I think it's going to be cute. This is going to be devastating, and I can't. Stu will browbeat me the minute this is too easy. And so, thank you for pointing that out to me. And yeah, that's getting cut as soon as this episode's done recording. May, I'll pick up this next one here. I thought this one was interesting. This is from Necrocrum_UBR. I feel a little bit like this with Spiritmonger in my IPA remastered cube. Mm-hmm. When I read that, I'm like, oh my God, there's an IPA remastered cube. Like, I need to see this. But Spiritmonger, and I think that one actually just got downshifted too, didn't it, May?
It got downshifted in Dominaria Remastered.
Yeah, okay. So, but here's what it does. For 3 colorless in Golgari, you get a creature beast 6/6. Whenever Spiritmonger deals damage to a creature, put a woman counter on Spiritmonger. Okay, fine. So when they block your vanilla creature, it gets bigger. And then you can pay a swamp or a black, regenerate Spiritmonger, so tap it out of the field. Regenerate something we don't see so frequently anymore, but it's pseudo-indestructibility. And then you can pay a forest or green. Spiritmonger becomes the color of your choice until the end of turn. So I believe people liked about this card so much is it got around protections at the time. Something like a sword, you could get around that with this card. So that's neat, but that's kind of, unless audience feel free to correct me, that's almost like flavor text for me at this point in a lot of my environments because it's not as relevant. But yeah, so this card's pretty interesting. I think in a lower powered environment, I can see where this card just gets bigger and bigger, even though it's a 6/6 vanilla. Every time it engages in combat and they take blocks, and especially they're not encouraged to double block because it says whenever Spiritmonger deals damage to a creature. So double trip, you can see the problem here, right? Is that those triggers will then fall. Yeah, I can see this card getting nutty pretty fast. Mm-hmm. I believe our good friend Chris Moore ran this in one of his cubes for a while. He might run it in a Sultai cube. It's cool.
I will note that what Necrocrum mentioned was that a lot of what really pushed it over was putting things like Armadillo Cloak on it, where getting that additional trample and lifelink and just scaling every time that they block, it could get out of control very fast, and that color targeted removal or protections or whatever, and being able to avoid those, plus regeneration, it's sticky. It is just very dangerous in those types of environments, and I can see why in those specific circumstances this card would be backbreaking.
Yeah, it's very fun, actually. I like the design of this card. I think it's unfair, but if you start putting auras and stuff on it, or any kind of equipment, this would get, out of control. May, would you mind taking on this next one? I believe this is both a favorite and not so favorite of yours.
Papa Zedru mentioned Sarah the Benevolent. Sarah the
Elephant.
Sarah the Elephant. Yep, you got it. We don't have time for the emblem to get around on Cube Night. So, Sarah the Benevolent is a 2 white legendary planeswalker, Sarah. Creature. It starts off with +2 creatures you control get flying +1/+1 until end of turn, which is already pretty good. -1, put a 4/4. Sorry, -3. Create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying vigilance, which fantastic. And then lastly, the card that would break an environment in half is -6. You get an emblem with, if you control a creature, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. And
card's
what
obnoxious.
This means, Oh, it's obnoxious. And what it means is if you don't have a way to get around that or have some other way of winning, it just wins the game. It prolongs it. I could see it being very strong, very obnoxious. And the fact that it can always make things flying, it sometimes can make 4/4 angels. But once you get up to that emblem is just, how do you get around that in your environment?
It's kind of like that one of Johnny, and I don't know the name off the top of my hand, that just
Mm-hmm.
says damage is reduced to, I guess, one.
Mm-hmm.
These type of cards for me from a cube curation, they just don't incentivize combat. They deactivate combat. They turn off creature strategies. It makes it into this meta game where now it's you versus trying to remove that one creature to deactivate Sarah's emblem, I guess, for that one turn, and then try to strike in so you can actually kill them. It just creates like this whole meta sub game, is what I'm trying to say,
Right.
and it detracts from the overarching game itself. It's no longer you versus the opponent; it's you versus Sarah the Benevolent.
Right.
And I like to try to avoid those type of cards as much as possible. Something
It
that
is a
just
case where
Yep.
mechanically it may not be the strongest planeswalker or anything, but it doesn't encourage a playstyle that could be perceived as very fun or interesting. And
Yeah,
sometimes that matters.
it does. I mean, the game's got to end, and the reason why people say that is so you can shuffle up and play another game, and people
Right.
have the opportunity to tweak and
This card
sideboard.
does not end the game, it prevents the game from ending.
That's a way of looking at it, right? And I get that. I try to avoid those a lot of times. Like I like Platinum Angel in a different context versus this because at least I can consistently fly in and strike, and it's vulnerable. Something
Well,
like this where
remember,
that. Yep.
you can surrender the game at any time.
You can, and that is something. The minute somebody does this, I guess you are now forced to do that. There's no reason to
Yep.
grind this out, and I think that really takes the idea of what you're saying from the fun. And if I'm just having to concede to get past this, I
Doesn't feel
personally, as a
good.
curator, yeah, I don't want to deal with that one. So this next one is from Lore Master 152. Thank you for the response, everybody, so far. So I've got a high-powered commander cube. Its play environment is meant to be fun, but strong. I mean, aren't we all, right? Up to that point, it handled every strong staple added to it: Rhystic Studies, Smothering Tithe, and even, they said, freaking Necropotence. Coma was the closest to breaking the cube, but it wasn't horribly good. And then the printing of Farewell gave it a nice out, so there was a solution. And then I decided to add Golos. So Golos is so I engaged with this individual and wanted to know more about this. But Golos Satyrus Pilgrim for 5 colorless mana to get a legendary artifact creature, Scout 3/5. When Golos Satyrus Pilgrim enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a land card, any land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. I inquired further and I wanted to know about, hey, Lore Master 152, what did this? And I said, was it the spinning? And this individual said, yes, it was the spinning. And for 2 colorless and Wooburg, exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn without paying their mana cost. So I kind of wanted to know, like, well, what's the spinning doing for you? And it was stuff like, and this is where it gets a little interesting on the spinning, May, and I want your thoughts on
Mhm.
this. When they're spinning Golos, Golos was removed because it was hitting cards like Blightsteel, Massicle Worm, and it said all with haste from Crashing Drawbridge, and Galta, and I guess Gisela, and that was the game with the bad Golos deck. But is that? Let me ask you a question. I have a different
Mhm.
opinion of this, so pardon me, Lore Master. That's why I was asking the questions. I run Golos in my Powered Vintage Cube, and a lot of people do, and there's no reason not to. But I also run Golos in my Two-Headed Giant Cube, which is a really weird jank full of squirrels. I've talked about it on multiple episodes. But what was interesting to me, my players, specifically Stu and I'll say Chill MTG, they both, and for that matter, we'll add in Chris Samich, they love to spin that wheel of Golos. But when you have to spin the wheel, you have 2 options with this card. It's modal. Either you're completing some kind of lands matters type of package, or you're playing for that wheel. And for me, if I'm going for the wheel, I'm embracing like the big games, the fun, Wheel of Fortune, right? And
Mhm.
when they spin that wheel, I think, in my opinion, their targets should be valid targets. Not granted, you got Crashing Drawbridge there, but they kind of earned it, in my opinion. I mean, they just paid 7 mana to potentially exile a top 3 cards of your library that may not, they may be duds to begin with. I mean, you may pay 21 mana before you even hit the Blightsteel, right? You've earned
Right.
it, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that, May? I don't see a reason to cut this, but that's just me.
I think the I think it is hard to determine without the context of the environment, because the context of your two-headed giant cube or the context of your vintage cube is different than whatever they're running for their cube. And Golos is a card that can be very, very powerful if the selection is good. I will also add that when it affects the drafting process of, I can now just pick whatever good top end payoff cards I can with Golos because I can just keep spinning the wheel until I just play something that wins the game.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the fun or the allure of Golos. I mean,
Sure.
that's what I want to do with Golos. And again, you pay 7 mana, 2 colorless
Right?
and Wooburg, and you only get to see really 3 cards. I mean, it's not like it's so random. It's Wheel of Fortune. Sometimes you hit the bankrupt, and sometimes you go to you win a car, then you pay taxes on it. But you see where I'm going with this is for me personally, Golos I think is a very fun design. I'd be curious to other people say, and I understand that this individual wanted to remove it from their environment for various reasons. That was the perfect storm, is what I read about there.
Mm.
That drawbridge, when it dropped and the ability to give those creatures haste, was the perfect storm. But as a curator, I would have seen that as a individual instance of it was just too good, right? But would that happen all the time is my question, May. That was kind of that 3 times strikes that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think this is
Versus
an appropriate time to call it the 3 times situation of, well, how often are we actually going to be experiencing that level of a situation? How consistent are you hitting the Golos, whatever? And what relevant targets are you cheating into play with Golos? And keeping all of those things in mind, it can be determined very, very heavily, not only on the draft, your environment, how fast you can get that 7 mana, what you are cheating out, how easily you can keep Golos on the board. There are a lot of different factors that can determine on how good it is for a commander type environment or, say, a vintage type environment. And in a vintage type environment, I think it would be fine. In a commander environment, I could see it being a lot more problematic.
my takeaway from that is the haste enabler. Although Blightsteel is definitely gross, right? But
Yeah.
removing that from the equation, Blightsteel doesn't kill you unless it has to hit you for all the infect points, anyways. I know that seems goofy to say, but the haste enabler is what really took all that stuff. And granted, Masker Worm probably really cleared the field, is what really happened here. The Masker Worm
Well,
drops down, everything gets crushed, and then attack. Ugh.
even without the colorless stuff, Golos can grab any color payoff of, I see this other big dumb payoff card, and I'm going to grab this other big dumb payoff card in green and red and blue, whatever, and I can just throw it all in my Golos deck.
Yeah, that's what I love about it, but I can see where others dislike about it. So it's an interesting card. I'm a huge fan of the card. I'd love to hear the audience's thoughts on that, and I would like to get some feedback on, is Golos appropriate for thematic or lower power designs, etc. Please hit us up on the Twitters or the Discords, or excuse me, the X, but preferably hit us up on the Discord, right? And we can talk about that because I'm really interested to hear more feedback on that. May, would you mind taking on this next one from Sonaf
Makuta.
Makuta. It's like Kuna Matata. Yep, something like that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Son of Makuta.
Son of Makuta. Oh, that makes more sense. There we go.
That makes way more sense. Sorry, we're going to butcher some of your usernames. So he said, when I was starting out with the cube, at the moderate power level, I tried some risky cards just to get a feel for boundaries, and the fastest cut was Packrat, which was a cut after the second game in round 1, with Sword of Bond in mind was being the second cut, and blah 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 blah. Notion Thief and Time Reversal being a combo piece that they've discovered. First, we will digest Packrat, where Packrat is a case of, we get to play a bunch of rats, it gets bigger for the amount of rats that you have, and you get to discard a card to make more pack rats. And unless your deck has your cube has a lot of sweepers or a lot of ways to deal with pack rat, not even counting if your opponent even drafted those cards or even have them on hand, it can win a game and it can get out of control if the environment is dirtily enough. And I can see why it can get out of control in that environment versus some other environments. Pack rat might just be an okay card.
Yeah, we actually talked about this. This came up. Packrat's actually come up. There's 2 strikes for Packrat now versus the previous episode. And the individual said that they just had too much single target removal. And Packrat does really get around that. And then the secondary debate that Stu and I had conversationally is whether or not this was still powered vintage qualified. And I still run it because this card, as you said, it's dirtily, but it can get out of control and it enables your reanimator strategies, etc. So I'm a fan of this card, and I still have that beautiful secret lair art. So
It is definitely a card that has a lot of homes, and I can definitely see why that context matters in this case, because if your opponent doesn't have a way to deal with it, it can get a way around a lot of usual answers.
Yep, it's dodgy, so take out their mana.
So would you like to take a second to talk about the swords in cube environments? Because I
Yes.
think that is worthy of its own sub-conversation within this comment.
Yeah, I agree. So the swords, we've got an episode it was the very first episode that Stu and I did, and now we have our amazing host May that's joined the team. But the very first, I recommend listening to this episode, but pardon the dust because we were learning what we we're doing. But the messaging was there. And the gist is protection as a whole is what the conversation really drilled down to. Any form of protections, that they limit interaction in cube environments. And I realized I'm not saying that I'm the arbiter of what's right in cube, by no means. Just from my personal experiences, the swords, I've limited them down to 2 now. I now run the Sword of Fire and Ice, and I run the Sword of Feast and Famine. But in this case, they're talking about the Sword of Body and Mind. Body and Mind is understandably the most powerful in a cube limited 40 card set, right? The ability to mill in 10s is absolutely insane. And then it's absurd. But outside of that context, the Sword of Body and Mind, it's say in a 100 card commander game, and I know we referenced that, but it's about the size of the deck is what really gauges how powerful that card becomes. I mean, if we talked about this in the middle episode, if someone were striking me this, May's thing, I'm just going to add 10 more cards from my sideboard in to try to beat that math. Mm-hmm. I never liked this card from the get, and I tried it because originally when I first started curating, I was very much a monkey see, monkey do. I didn't know what I was doing. Chris is my hero. I'm following him. I'm like the little Looney Tunes dog following around the bulldog, going, "Hey, what should I do next, Chris?" Yeah. What should I do next, Chris? And so, I'm trying to find my own way. And at the time, I put whatever Chris put in there, or whatever he suggested, or what the community suggested. So obviously, the community said milling 10 cards is good, wins a lot, very powerful. For me, as I've matured in my curation, and now we've moved into 10 plus years of this idea, I realize that those protections have significant drawbacks. And interaction is the key to enjoying Magic, at least in my opinion. And I know there's a lot of individual that says my fun is all my fun and I don't share my fun. That's fun from a player standpoint, in my opinion. But as a curator, I have to think about everyone's fun. I want my cubes to be accessible, inclusive, and fun. And
Absolutely.
the swords detract from that, or at least they have the potential to do that. There's a home for them, just like every other card in Magic. There's a home. There's a place where they should be. But I would say that oftentimes, more than not, protections just shut down a color. And if you get that one singular matchup where you say, in this case, you're playing against a Simic player, and you now have Sword of Body and Mind, not only are you milling them, but they really can't do a whole lot to stop you from doing it.
Right.
So, as our good friend Derek says, May, find the fun. What level of fun are you having, or they're just crushing someone who can't actually play a game against you?
I will 100% agree with you. I will also add the little pinch of salt here in saying that it usually depends on what the curator's goals are, and sometimes when people want that type of uninteractive, stompy equipment, whatever's from all of the swords, is that sometimes that people will find their appropriate home of, this cube is supposed to be a bunch of unfun cards. This is us being mean to each other. We're bullying each other. We're pulling out all stops, no mercy, nothing.
I see what you're doing. It's like the anti-fun, but it's intentionally anti-fun to be fun, because that's
exactly
the host of the environment.
Right, and I think that there are a lot of curators that could try to make that work, but I tend to also be in the boat that interaction is important, and having an I win button against somebody who drafted the particular colors against your sword it doesn't feel good.
The other detractor from the swords too is they're sideboardable, right? Like, you don't know. I'm behind the veil and I can't see that May's building a Dimir deck, and I'm running I'm not running the new Dimir sword. I'm running the Gruul sword, and these names elude me because they're newer. But it's interesting to see now that my sideboard, I'll sideboard that in to try to get an advantage. And I don't know if I want that type of gameplay. I would encourage everybody to reference our Swords of Fallen Favor episode. And I said, pardon the dust, but we go into this extensively. Also, what's really neat, May, too, and you'll get a chuckle out of this, is we did our first I guess our first community interaction. We took an experiment out there, and we may have done this during the second episode, but we predicted what the Gruul and the Demir would be before it was even mentioned that it would be released, and we got pretty close. Like, we did some fan feedback, and we released that like on I think our Lands Matters episode, what the fans said, and some people actually got it pretty damn right, like Surveil and stuff like that. It was nutty. It was so close, but it was interesting to see that people could try to predict those designs. The next one that I kind of want to touch on before we move past this is interesting. It's the Notion Thief time reversal combo kind of idea there. And basically, Notion Thief is if an opponent would draw a card, except the first one, you draw that card instead. That's the gist. And time reversal is just another big shuffle up and play again, like time spiral type of effect. And I'm not going to read these cards, but what I'm going to encourage people to do is reference Chill MTG's YouTube channel. And he covers what is a tool now that's called the Commander Spellbook. And I use it regularly. And Commander Spellbook is you can export out your Cube Cobra list, turn it into a CSV file, and drop it into their Find My Combos. And what it'll do for you is either tell you that you have combos that maybe you didn't know about, and it'll give you the lines so you can make your cube more spicy, or it'll also tell you the cards that you can do to complete your combos. It'll say if you add this, this, and X, you now have XYZ infinite combo. And if you're a person that's anti-combo and does not want that in their low-powered environment, it will flag it for you, and you can say, hey, I just want to break this combo. So I really want to reference that. Check out our good friend Chill MTG YouTube channel. He covers this. He does a fantastic job. His artwork is beautiful when he makes a production video, and highly recommend it. But it does cover how to use that tool, the Commander Spellbook. That'll help you not have these broken combos that you maybe are not inviting, you inadvertently added. May, you said that earlier. New card comes out. This is awesome. Plug it in. Neat synergy, but I missed the fact that now I have a deadly 2-card infinite combo that formed up. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sometimes it comes up where you didn't intend a combo to happen, but it comes up, and when it does, it creates an innate, unfun feeling for the table. Sometimes it's nice to have your players discover new things or find new things or find their aha moments in your environment. I think those are great. Those should be encouraged. But when it comes to a case like Notion Thief time reversal, it's turn 4 Notion Thief, turn 5 time reversal. You're just out of the game.
I agree. So I actually run in Uberbear's Artifact Cube, I run the KCI combo, which generally takes 3 to 4 pieces to assemble. And at CubeCon #1, players came over to me. This one person fanned out the cards and said, I completed the combo. It was awesome. And I'm looking at the cards. I'm like, yeah, I don't even know. Like, I didn't even know these pieces, but I'm like, okay, cool. And I was really proud because that person found their aha moment, right? And it was exciting. And it's not like a broken 2-card combo. I'm not a fan of those in any type of format that I play. I don't want easy wins. I just don't like it. Stu, this is a shout out to you with your whatever Thassa's Oracle and the Consulate, whatever nonsense. That's not my personal jam, but I respect people that like that. The other type of combo that I run in Uberbear's Horror Cube, also featured at CubeCon, is I run the Phyrexian Altered plus Gravecrawler combo, where you have to have a zombie in place and then like a Blood Arst effect. And someone asked me that recently, are you just running Phyrexian Altar for the mana value? And I go, nope, it is 100% a signpost that there are about 5 to 6 ways to break that card, but they're all 4-piece combos. If you take the dedication to assemble that and the stars align and you hit it, because I don't run tutors or anything, May, not really, then you've really worked for it, and I feel like you've earned it. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah, I agree, because, like, in the Fey Cube, I very intentionally have, like, the champion mechanic, where it just enters, when it enters, exile something that's its creature type, or in the case of Changelings, it's just exile another creature. But if you get 3 of them, and then some kind of way to benefit from the ETBs, then you essentially just keep flickering them over and over and over and over. And you can leave with, like, 14 Centillion life with, whatever it's called, the Distinguished Conjurer, right? But it's a 4-card combo that never really comes up because those cards are contested, even though that there are a lot of ways to tutor them. And it's a case where those type of combos can encourage interesting Johnny interactions with your pod. And I think that those can be a good thing. But you have to ask yourself, honestly, whether or not that is something that you're looking to encourage. And I see it as, if somebody is building enough of those pieces to make this work, they earned it.
Yeah, so it also comes down to player knowledge, right? Some people
Right.
just have more experience in seeing combos, and others don't realize the combos exist because
Right.
maybe they didn't play Modern or Legacy or Vintage, and they
As
didn't know
opposed
that.
to, say,
Right.
Notion Thief Time Reversal is just, it is self explanatory. It's turn 4, turn 5. You're out of the game. Two
I've
cards,
been
its investment's pretty low.
Yeah, two card combos generally read themselves, or sometimes they're a little bit more convoluted, but sometimes if you just read them, you'll figure it out. Reading the card understands the card.
Yep.
One thing that I was thinking, this is a side topic again, tangent number 14 here at this point, is we've got the event that we're going to in Durham, and we're going to have a bunch of drafters whom I've never met draft Uberbear's Horror Cube, Uberbear's Artifact Cube. Both I know have infinite combos. And one of the things I was considering is just doing a quick little printout and passing it out to show the commander spell book as it shows it so people understood the combos. But I was wondering if by doing that, I was detracting from the experience of the people who hunt the combos. Maybe I'll just announce the generic combo and let them find their way.
Look, maybe
Opposed
it'll
to
be a
telling,
foreshadowed episode where we talk about, you know, how to appease the different player types for your pods.
yeah, we're definitely going to do that. How do you build a recipe or a cookbook so your players know these weird interactions? So that puts everybody on a pseudo, like, I guess, like an Easter egg hunt or a quest to try to find
Sure.
these components. And if they pull it off, good for you. But maybe they just didn't know it because they never did any competitive play. They never ran the KCI combo in any, vintage or modern idea. So they don't know about it. So I don't know if it's fair for only one person out of your 8 to understand that interaction. What do you think about that, May, before we move on?
I think when it comes to cases like those, it comes down to what your pod is, who's the type of people that you're expecting to play your cube. If you're expecting new players to be playing with a lot of your veteran players, then probably it's not a good idea to have a bunch of things that reward that player knowledge and whatever, where a new player will look at that and be like, okay, I can sacrifice an artifact to get 2 mana. That seems pretty whatever. I'm paying 4 mana to do this. That doesn't seem very spectacular. Versus an experienced player will be like, oh, that is a dangerous card. I should probably pick this so I can do dangerous things with this.
May, would you mind taking on this next card, pretty please?
I will
feel
take
like
on this next comment.
This is this is in your wheelhouse big time. I figured you'd enjoy this, but I'm gonna crack a beer.
Go for it.
All right, what you got?
Rebel of Red said, well, I run a low-powered environment cube. It's sort of a peasant and uncommon cube with some rares and mythics in it, like Immerstrom Predator. Might be one of the most problematic cards, and it's hard to remove, destroys any graveyard strategies, and it's relatively low curve. It's played in any deck that's splashing green. It just beats you down with every turn, ever with evasion. It becomes a sort of running gag with whoever drafts it. The first turn will actually win. It has actually warped the cube, and it has added a lot more activated ability negation effects just because of it. Breaks my heart because it's such a great card. So, Immerstrom Predator is 2 black red, if I can speak. Creature Vampire Dragon, 3/3 flyer. Whenever Immerstrom Predator becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on Immerstrom Predator. Sacrifice another creature, it gains indestructible until end of turn, and tap it. I will start off by saying that having that, it's not quite a Scooz effect, but being able to scale like a Scooz while also being indestructible and evasive, it scales out of control. It controls the graveyard. It is a very, very powerful scaling threat that you can drop as soon as turn 4. I can see this being very, very warping in a peasant environment.
Well, which leads me to my next question. Would you run this in Uberbear's Horror Cube? Because I don't think I ever heard of this card until this person responded.
I would counter that with, does your Horror Cube have a way that it could answer it's indestructible?
Path to Exiles. But so that kind of brings up the good point. Sure, I have Swords, Path to Exiles, and a few others.
Then yes.
But as this topic progressed and as the discussion with Rebel Red, as we talked about this further, it was another one of those, it creates an entire meta subgame around this card.
Right.
Because now you have to have the interactive pieces, as I just said, swords, etc., exile effects, to deal with this, because it's interesting. I do like the design of this card. It has a pseudo kind of, it's like Regenerate-esque, right? The way it taps itself. So I do like the fact that it disarms itself, but it gets around board wipes. So those are a no-go. I mean, you have to have either tuck effects, bounce effects, or exile effects.
The fact that it scales, it's indestructible, and it hates on the graveyard, it's a lot of text, it does a lot of things, and it's invasive on top of that. I think it is a very, very good card, and asking your opponent whether or not they have a way to deal with indestructible is oftentimes just a win condition.
Yeah, I do run some indestructible, but like, especially in the artifact cube, I'm very mindful of that. That's the reason why, and we'll talk about this shortly, the One Ring, why I haven't introduced that, because of you have to have an exile effect.
Yep.
Like, was it cast into the flame or cast in the fire or whatever? You have to have the card to match the card, and if you didn't draft it, you've created this chase game, right? Where the entire draft comes around, and other people have mentioned this, where it comes around, I need to get this card to counter this card. It's no longer about the draft experience and about the identity of the deck that you've drafted. It's about an individual card forming the identity of the draft. And I try to avoid that when possible, especially in lower powered thematic designs. I just don't want that. We talked about that with Cauldron Complete. Cauldron Complete, we, in the previous episode, created that type of dynamic where Stu said, you bring out Stoneforge Mystic, you cheat it in, or use Goblin Welder, cheat it in. The card would have been perfectly fine if it was just a 7-drop and doing the thing it did, all the things it does. But the fact that you could cheat it in and make it go faster, it really created this whole sub-game around that card. And people were coming up to me during CubeCon #1 and going, I love this card. Well, I know they did, but I wonder if the opponent loved that card. You know what I mean? Did you enjoy one person's playing chess, the other one's playing checkers? That's not the type of game style I want to invoke.
A related note to that is counting wins is a zero-sum game because the same amount of people are winning as the same amount of people are losing. But counting the fun is what matters. And if one person's having a lot of fun playing this stupidly card that nobody can interact with, but all of the three to four other people that they played against today are like, wow, that matchup was miserable. I don't want to play this. That is definitely a negative experience for those cards.
And that's a measurable impact. So the fun is impactful and measurable. The how many times I win, that's neat if you want to get better. Andy Mangold referenced this recently where he was doing a spreadsheet, which I thought was fascinating, where he was tracking his win-loss rate and a whole bunch of other metrics. And I thought this was really cool. But he did talk about during an episode that it also like put a spotlight on 50-50 win rate. I win as much as I lose, etc. And it made you feel this pressure to try to move that needle on the win rate. And that's where I do enjoy doing that. We've talked about that before, both in our commander circles as well as our cube circles, about tracking like who wins. And we've decided upon this. And I want to thank our good friend Bill, who gave us a Ricky Martin token that we're now, instead of tracking win loss and about who got it, we now take this Ricky Martin, and our good friend Christian has made like a proxy card, or it's not even a proxy card, it's just one of those blank cards you fill on the back where we sign who won the draft on the back of the Ricky Martin. So it's this like moving around the room type of thing. Who gets the Ricky Martin for the day? And so it creates like this fun trophy, but it doesn't detract from the experience where it's about win-loss tracking. It's about just getting that token and giggling about it and going, yay, I got Ricky Martin for the day. We're going to do that this evening. And it just creates lulz. But May, have you ever done anything like that before in your group before we move on? Any kind of tracking?
No, I have not. I have done tracking for miscellaneous meta decks in the Fake Cube. I have done all that, but I haven't done anything like with the Ricky Martin token or anything. I like data. I like to keep track of it. And it's not a matter of me trying to be spiky and being like, oh, how can I increase my win percentage? I don't care. I want to keep track of what are people building, what's winning, and what comes together. I
agree with that. We don't track the win percentages. We just track we kind of know overarching who's good at what cube.
Oh, like I will also add, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I will also add the other thing that I track, which is the most important part, is how much fun was it?
Yeah, that's a simple question. Our good friend Jason, Dr. Brinkley, when we did our 10K celebration, we talked about like, he did some predictive models. He's a statistician, and he asked some very specific but generic, I guess, kind of combo. Questions: what's your favorite color to draft? What's your play style? And I can share this form with everybody. And I actually uploaded it a couple of times. It's pretty basic, but then he ran it through a tool that he has online, which I'll also share. But it basically brings out like a chart like, hey, May says she loves Rakdos. And he wanted to do a correlation of whether or not you as a player would gravitate towards Rakdos and whether or not your win rate tethered to your preference in color pie versus your play style. Like, and he was trying to do these disseminate whether or not you were an aggro player and I like Rakdos. Well, were you always going to try to draft that no matter what? And it's not a great metric. It's a one-time draft, but he spanned it across during the 10K, 3 different cubes, and he tracked your win rate and your play style to see if there's a correlation of whether or not you just played better in those colors. And I thought it was neat.
It was definitely neat.
Yeah, it's neat.
Also,
I don't know what you can do with it.
Add that I'm an Izzet player. I'm a filthy spell slinger.
Are you now? I'm a Gruul player by heart. I'm a ginger, and just something about the whole Gruul thing just really gets me going. And whenever I draft, I'm like, I love this stuff, and it feels like the underdog too, and I really like to play into that role. The next one we got was from HD114, and I thought this was interesting. It was Ether Sworn Adjudicator. In my early attempts at adding modern cards reprinted in old frame, this card dominated in my powered pre-modern era cube. I found several amazing inclusions from retro framed modern cubes, but this one was just too good. So let me read you what this card does. And I thought this was interesting. It's Ether Sworn Adjudicator for 4 colorless and an island. You get an artifact creature, Vidalcan Knight, 4/4. It has flying. So that's kind of the base stats. This is where we kind of get into the Esper-ish type of components. For 1 colorless and Orzhov, you tap it, destroy target creature or enchantment. I kind of looked at that and I like this. This was on my short list for my artifact cube at one point. And then for 2 colorless and 1 island, you get untap Ether Sworn Adjudicator, and you can do that kind of infinitely. That's it's got the infinite bars or the double, whatever, you know what I mean, the colon.
Yep.
Which is interesting
for that one.
You do not. And which is interesting about it is because you can attack with it and then set it back up as a defender 4/4 flyer. The fact that this was mana intensive for the Orzhov is the only reason why I didn't add it, because I was really personally attracted to not only the destroy target creature, but the fact that it deals with enchantments. And I find that a lot of times,
fun in your artifact cube.
I might actually have to see about slotting it in, but I would treat it as a blue card.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'd treat it as a blue card.
Yeah, I might actually add this in. So I really do appreciate this HD 114 because, a lot of these cards, when I'm going through them, I forget about them, right? I move on. I look at more modern cards and always try to do the pop and fresh, but I forget that some of these cards printed are just really great and probably do deserve a home. So I do like this card, and I think an Esper player could really get paid off for this, and it's kind of got a control-y aspect to it. I don't think it's broken, but I think you put this in the right environment, and I'd like to know more about this environment. They said it was retro frame reprinted modern cards, so I could see maybe that in that type of context that this card just did so much versus the other cards didn't do enough. I mean, that can happen. You start taking the old wizards and the new wizards, and there you go.
I'm a big fan of retro cubes and the type of metagames that they produce, because the thing about a lot of retro Magic is that the creatures are bad, but the spells are good. And, well, I should say the non-creatures are good. And when we look at Ether Sworn Adjudicator, by today's standard, it is a thoroughly okay card. Like, paying 3, tap it down to destroy something, and then pay 3 to untap it. That is a thoroughly okay ability by today's standards. But when you're in the context of retro, getting a 4/4 for 5 flyer in blue is already absurd, and the fact that you can just untap it for that kind of pseudo-vigilance, it can be really backbreaking in a lot of these older environments, because a 4/4 flyer for 5 that just untaps whenever you want is pretty good, not even including the fact that you can just tap it down to destroy things. And then if you have so much mana to dump, you can just destroy multiple things potentially. And I can see why in that context of, this is really a bunch of really old cards and then a reprint with an old border, it can change what your environment actually has access to. And I think that I can see why that this would be really strong in that environment.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. This is analogous to the downshifting we talked about with Commander Masters, where the peasant and pauper players are getting cards that are coming from either uncommon to common or from rare mythic to uncommon. And now they're going to introduce those into their environments, but it's easy to forget that those cards at one point held like this power spectrum, right? And now you step it down. Well, the same happens with these retrograde, where they start doing these old foil borders, and they're taking a card from, say, let's just say from Legends, and now they introduce a card that's printed in 2023 because it has a frame that qualifies, but those cards are those styles of play, those development and the R&D behind it, they're not on the same playing field. So people have to evaluate. Just because it has a retro frame doesn't mean it fits. Is that a fair assessment, May?
Yeah, I agree.
This next one, would you mind taking it on, please? I think you'll enjoy this one.
Forever I Be Stanging said, did a two-player draft, played one match with Clocknapper, and cut it immediately. Turns out the creature that gives you basically 2 times walks is busted. The play pattern for anyone who hasn't seen this card before is that you choose beginning phase, and then your opponents untap and draw steps. So Clocknapper is an uncard. It's 3 blue, creature human spy, 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, choose beginning phase, pre-combat main, combat phase, post-combat main phase, or ending phase. Steal that phase from a target player during his or her next turn. So I am a big advocator for experimenting with uncards in your cubes and playing around with those uncards. And I think that this is a case where this is an uncard that should probably needs to be put in a stronger environment.
Yeah, we found during our last episode, uncards are the biggest qualifiers for breaking environments. I mean, because of what they are, so you have to be really mindful of that. If I was going to make a suggestion, I run a 2-headed giant cube, and I run opposed to this, because I did look at the Nabber or whatever it is. I looked at that card in the beginning, and I actually just have gotten rid of Urla Squirrels and all the uncards, because I looked at them as being funny, and I thought they'd be fun. I really lost in the fact that it's only going to be one team that has access to the said broken cards because they're so limited. And I think I run a 480. So the opportunity is there for one team to get the most broken thing, right? So if I was going to make a recommendation for something that's similar that I've tried out is Fate Spinner. For 1 colorless and 2 islands, you get a creature, human, wizard. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player chooses draw step, main phase, or combat phase. The player skips each instance of the chosen step or phase this turn, and it's a 1/2. It dies to literally everything. Not a great attacker, but it makes both of your opponents make that choice of which one, and they don't have to choose the same one, which is interesting, right? So it creates this dynamic of, hey, I'm going to attack, but you probably don't have any attackers either, May, to the left of me, right? And you need to develop your board state, so I'm going to choose my main, and I really don't need my main. I'm going to aggro in. Opposed to stealing their turn with an uncard. So
stealing their untapped faves in their draw is backbreaking.
So I think,
and if you have a way to flicker it, it's just so mean.
Yeah, I think Fate Spinner is kinder, sweeter, gentler for the 2-headed giant environment. I could be proven wrong, but opposed to the other, yeah, I could definitely see that not working out for most people. All right, for the next one, we got K Modzor. And while doing more testing for CubeCon, and I feel you there 100%, right? I decided to try out the One Ring, a nice card advantage artifact for slower decks. They put shower decks in a creative cube. So this was kind of the scenario. I thought it's kind of powerful, but they'll get punished for being too greedy with the bird encounters. But then one game, this kind of goes into that maze horse, and Cabe Modzor, if you listen to the show, we've talked about the call me once, might be a horse. People like to do that. 2 times, some other person calls you a horse, sure, but 3 times a horse. But I think this scenario you have is another one of those perfect storms. And I'll give my counterpoint here in a minute. So one game played out like this. Cast the ring, protection, tap, draw a card, pass. Then untap, draw 2 cards, cast, callous dismissal, targeting ring, bouncing it, and I'll talk about this, a bounce card that amasses. Recast ring, protection tap, draw card, pass. Untap, draw 2 cards, cast Snapcaster Mage, callous dismissal again. So that person is kind of negating the negative aspects of the bird encounters. I don't in my opinion, humble opinion here, I don't think that that's broken. I think that's someone being innovative, solving. I don't see that as broken. I see that as someone finding a solution to a problem. And I would almost encourage that, right? Like, that's neat to me. That's not a cuttable offense. That's a scenario where a player goes, all right, I don't want to die from these bird encounters. I want to take this card to its peak, but I don't think that's justification, in my opinion, from a curation standpoint, that perfect storm of this scenario. That's just a really good player, in my opinion. May, what do you think?
Well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah, it is 100% just my opinion. I think this is someone solving a problem. But it cost him 1 billion mana, if you think about it, right? So Callous Dismissal,
it definitely does.
So 4 mana, it's 4 mana for the One Ring, and I'll read the One Ring because we talked about this in our previous episode. The One Ring is one I'm considering is legendary artifact Indestructible. I get that indestructibility is a problem. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. That's what this person was solving. Tap, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. Callous Dismissal, and I like this card. This card's spicy. Callous Dismissal for 1 colorless and an island, you get a sorcery, so it's slow. If it were instant, I could see where this could be even more problematic. But return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, a mass 1. And you put a 1/1 counter, and you make an army, whatever, zombies. But this was a very slow play. If you count that up, this person did 4 for the One Ring, did the thing, then on their turn, during their main phase, was forced to do Callous Dismissal, and they did it for 2 more, so they paid 6, essentially. They snapcastered it later in the story for another 2, so they did do the flash element. I mean, that's neat. I like that. But then they recast the One Ring for 4 again. So I think, in my personal opinion, that's someone just problem solution oriented, right? And they didn't break the card. They found a way to take the card to its limits and play that's just me seeing a player. I would be impressed by that more than offended by it. What do you think, May?
Oh, I'm definitely impressed by it. However, I understand that the One Ring it has been breaking a lot of just environments in constructed formats. And in Cube, the One Ring tends to be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Swingy. It is still the problem of, even without any sort of manipulation or anything, it is an indestructible artifact that enters, gives you protection from everything. It is basically Teferi's protection on an artifact at face value that you can bounce back to your hand, you could repeat it, you could, whatever. Being able to negate your opponents from interacting with you at all for an entire turn does not feel good for the receiving end. And I think that this is a case where the fun is a net negative. Where the person who is innovating it is fun. I can applaud that. I can applaud that innovation. I can applaud the deck that came together. I can applaud how much mana went into it and how much they definitely earned being able to do this. But I would definitely be a little frustrated being on the receiving end of this, of what are you supposed to do?
I'm on the opposing spectrum of this. I go with what you said. This person earned this. And I think this is cool. And they paid 1 billion mana to do the thing, right? And I kind of lean towards this is a different type of fun. Maybe not for the opponent. Like, maybe I'm the curator watching these two people play, and one person's scowling like, oh, I can't do anything like that. But the other one's really doing a complex interaction at the end of the day, right? So I'm kind of leaning towards the fence of this person worked for it, this person earned it. Maybe the opponent's not digging the interaction as much as me as the curator watching as the third party entity here. But I really do appreciate what happened there. And I wouldn't imagine that this folds together like this every time. Maybe it does.
There are a lot of moving pieces, but at face value, the One Ring is already just really good.
Yeah, so there was a conversation during the Great CubeCon sell-off, which, by the way, I think they're down to almost 50, maybe less by the time this episode airs, and if not at all. So get your CubeCon tickets. If it's too late, I apologize. But one of the things that we talked about during the sellout, the original, within the first 30 minutes, is I was in the Discord channel, and I believe it was our good friend Dan Schneider, who has the Devoid Cube, which I highly recommend you check out, and draft at CubeCon. but that
Excited for it.
he was stating that the One Ring was scalable, and I found that conversation interesting. And I'd like to see that. Like, I've been hesitant to add this. I still haven't picked up a copy yet for myself. I saw it as a powered vintage 540 type of environment.
Hmm.
I was apprehensive to put this in Uberbear's artifact cube because I've had my experiences with the word indestructible. But what he was saying is that this card scales based on I guess, the reward of what the environment provides you.
Sure.
Uh, I was trying to track that. I'd like to see more data on that, and I'm curious. And I think KubeCon 2023 will really tell the tale here of whether or not what the One Ring does, right?
The One Ring for the Sapperling deck. Let's go.
Yeah, people are going to do some nutty stuff with this, but it may not, like, if you're playing an old border cube and you run the One Ring for whatever reason, right?
Right.
That maybe it doesn't play as powerfully as it does in a powered vintage cube where there's just more impactful cards.
Right.
So it kind of tracks that conversation that Stu and I have had on previous conversations. Kind of, for me, maybe folds into that force of will concept, where force of will on paper looks really good and it's very well known in the community. But I run force of will in a lot of my thematic designs because the card scales with the power level on what you're pitching and what you're canceling. Does that make sense, May?
Yeah. I think that we can respectfully disagree with each other because we have a bit of a different approach when it comes to evaluating this card as a curator, and I think that's fine. And
I think it's fine too.
The context matters for that environment because of that scalability.
Well, I first off this was on Reddit, and this is a part 2 that, like I said, we had not planned for. But I put the same question on Reddit, and people got so many interactions. I'm like, we got to do a part 2, May. And I just think it's an interesting conversation. We talked about this, like, what broke your environment? How did you respond? Was it one time? Was it 2 times? Or did it become a horse, right? What was your reaction time to the situation? And will a card break your environment? Will it be relevant in the future? We've talked about this before. Some people mentioned there was some stuff in the previous episode where people said Loxodon Warhammer. In the way back when, Loxodon Warhammer was just a powerhouse. And in the right environment, it still is. But with modern Magic and these cards, and we talked about power on the horizon, the power creep that unfolds as we get into 2023 and beyond, that some of these cards, like Loxodon Warhammer, will suddenly becomes less and less relevant. Nobody wants to pay 3 and then equip 3 anymore. Everybody wants to go to the 1 and 1. People want to go to 1 and 0. You see where this is going. Like, power curve is moving so rapidly that us as curators have to make responsible choices. And it's okay. These are not mistakes. Let's start there. As we've talked about in every episode, we garnered them and labeled them as mistakes. Like, I ran Cauldron Complete, and I wanted to impress everybody at CubeCon with my curation prowess. But it wasn't really a mistake. It was me being experimental, but it was a card that did, in fact, break the environment, just like Kappa Cannoneer, etc. So, May, do you have any final thoughts on that?
I think that sometimes it's okay to experiment, and sometimes there are reasons to do it. I have made several posts on my fake cube. Sorry for keep bringing it up. Oh, I'm never supposed to talk about it again. But, but in the context of the fake cube, and when I was developing a lot of the wolf archetype, I had to keep trying to nudge that needle forward until it was a playable archetype. And part of that, trying to nudge that needle forward, was putting in some of these more powerful cards, like Prime Adversary, whatever the 6-drop was. The cards themselves don't matter. The point is that I was playing very, very upper end, powerful wolf creating cards that were way stronger than the rest of the environment to see how far I could push that archetype before it was a problem. And sometimes that it is an okay thing to do to test out and to experiment with, but also having the humility to recognize when that is too far, or you pushed it too far, or it's not the appropriate thing for what you're trying to test.
I know we said we were on our final thoughts, and we've got a lot of responses here that we'll revisit in future episodes. But I think, May, the final one that we should close with is Magical Hacker. Would you mind taking that one on to really just kind of summarize this idea?
Absolutely. So, Magical Hacker was brought up by Salivates, and is the only card that they recall that was cut after 1 day for both being powerful and unfun at the same time, specifically because it allows you to immediately ultimate a Planeswalker. Magical Hacker is an uncard that is 1 and a blue for a creature human gamer. 1 power, 2 toughness. You can pay 1 blue to change the text of a target spell or permanent by replacing all instances with a plus sign with a minus sign, and vice versa until the end of the turn. So, what this means is that for, say, the Planeswalker we mentioned earlier with Sarah, you don't have a way to answer this emblem? Well, with Magical Hacker, I can just play the emblem as soon as I drop Sarah, and she gets 6 loyalty counters. Deal with it. And in that specific environment, Magical Hacker is really, really unfun. And I will also add that when you have it in like a lower power environment, being able to change a giant growth into a kill spell is interesting. That is interesting, it's creative, and it allows people to experiment. But it is very, very power dependent, and it very, very much depends on what your upper end cards are going to look like, what type of interactions it's going to encourage. And that's the problem with uncards as a whole, is that they push the boundaries of what Magic is doing.
Yeah, Salivate's actually continued further, and I just thought this was an interesting tie-off. I'd be curious to know of other broken uncards, just to give them a chance at least once. Other uncards that have survived multiple iterations of Vintage Power Cube for us include Blast from the Past, defined as all around a fairly reasonable card like Electrolyze. Booster Tutor, always a crowd favorite. Let's pause there for a minute. Booster Tutor's one that I don't know if it's a crowd favorite amongst this individual's group, but a lot of times yeah, I know. For me, it's another one of those, you got to pause. The person's going to go tutor something, but now they're tutoring out of the sideboard, right? And then they have to find a solution. And I believe Andy Mangold's kind of talked about that in a recent episode where they're talking about like accessing the wish cards is one of the ones they brought up. It's very Wish-esque. You go get a solution, problem solution type thing. I think it's neat. It's a hidden booster, right? That's how the card works, is you have just a pack you make out of your cube if you have available, and people get to kind of source from that. I think it's neat, but I kind of avoid those cards that have sub-game-ish type of effects to it. And then another one, I don't know what this card is, but it's who, what, when, where, why. Modal card that isn't too strong by itself, but pretty cool if you try to support.
It's like a 5-split card. It's pretty cool.
Isochron Scepter, so they make it repeatable and breakable. Isochron Scepter actually showed up on this list too, and it's on the watch list. Probably should not be on my watch list. I think I've just ignored people for
I don't think Isochron Scepter works with who, where, when, why.
Well, either way, Isochron Scepter as a card is a repeatable effect, and Stu and I have talked about this on numerous occasions. Anything that's repeatable over and over again, counterspell, 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 bolt, 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 even though you're paying more for it, I think 2, it's still questionable. And then RB Gone encourages drafting.
Rare Be Gone.
Rare Be Gone. Oh, I said R Be Gone. Encourages drafting and playing a unique style of a deck. And then Topsy Turvy.
Because it punishes rares.
Yeah. Topsy Turvy. Almost too good. Almost cut because it takes 5 minutes every time we try to figure out how to play with it. So that's sub-game in the nature of what it is. But I think that's a really cool question, is what uncards you've added to your environment that have broken it. Because we reference Urla Squirrel, and we've referenced Clock Nabber and stuff like that. And I think they have this allure, right? This, when you're looking at them as a curator, they make you giggle. But you have to really think about, like, one person's going to giggle, the other person's not giggling at all. Because it's just the nature of these cards. So I'd love to hear the community's response on that. I think it's just fascinating that uncards kind of ended up on this list a lot more than before. It was the Power Max stuff, the Briarberries, the Moats, the Uros, and the Okos, right? This was a different type of environment. Context matters here, right? So getting that feedback was really interesting. I think the purpose of this episode is to basically share with new curators the mistakes that happen and just take the feedback and adapt to it. Would you agree to that, May?
I can agree with that. I also think that the takeaway should be that mistakes and adaptation to those mistakes is a natural process of designing and curating your environment, and not being afraid to push those boundaries and then learn to reel those decisions back when it goes horribly. And sometimes just asking people or asking your pod or whatever if the card that you're trying to introduce is something that they would be interested in actually playing with or against. There are a lot of different approaches when it comes to trying to figure out what is good or what is bad or what is too powerful for your environment as a curator. And when it comes to a lot of these cards that get cut because they're too strong, Sometimes it's too ambitious, sometimes it's too tall, sometimes it's that accidental, I didn't think that this card would be as strong as I thought it was. Regardless of what the situation is, take it with a grain of salt, make your changes, and move on. Let your cube develop and grow as you do, because we're all humans and we make mistakes.
And Stu kind of summed it up is he being the drafter, right? And I'm the curator. He said he is involved as the drafter so that he's less subjective, more objective on the responses and tries to see what May and Chris Samich and Christian and all these other curators out in the world are trying to do. He tries to understand the 40,000 foot vision opposed to prior, he would say, you should get this card out of here, it's broken. But the context from the drafter's feedback matters as much as the ability to take that feedback as the curator, right? And you have to, and the subject nature matters, because some of these cards, when we talked about them, the perfect storm evolved, and May and I, you can see we deliberated back and forth. But I think that's what's so interesting about these conversations is that everybody has their viewpoints on what that interaction meant to them. But then you as a curator now have to process that and decide if that's healthy for your environment. We want to know, because I think that there's more mining to be done here. Would you agree, May? There's more opportunity to talk about this.
Absolutely.
What card broke your environment? I mean, that's it. And by broke, did it break a game? Did you cut it immediately? Did you do our 3 strikes or became a horse type of situation? Or did you get some kind of feedback that maybe, as we just said, that was highly subjective? Maybe the person didn't have fun and weren't really feeling the draft. So that context matters as much as the context of the card to the cube, right? So maybe you just sit down, talk with your players and say, hey, I want to experiment. I'm sorry you had the feels during the situation. That was not my intent. But I would like for you to try it again, and then we'll take that into see the impact of that, right? Because find the fun, I can't get out of the find the fun. Derek, thank you for find the fun, because that's probably one of the coolest things anybody's really, May, you said that's the basic idea of game design.
Yep, follow the fun.
But I didn't always do that. Truthfully, I didn't always do it, and now I'm a believer. Other than that, we're moving over to the socials. May, you got any final thoughts on that subject?
Nope.
So hopefully by the time this episode comes out, if not before, Ubercube's very honored to be a part of Extra Life. The Gathering Place, I went by and met the owners. It's a store in Chapel Hill, and they're going to be sponsoring an event in Durham, North Carolina. And we've had people reach out to us where Uber Bear's Horror Cube will be launching a draft for charity for the Children's Miracle Network at 2 p.m. on August the 19th. It can only see 8 players, and I'll give a little bit more context to that. But then at 6 p.m., we'll be launching another draft where Uber Bear's Artifact Cube will be launching. And then the following day, on the 20th, Uber Bear's Two-Headed Giant Cube. A lot of Uber Bear there, guys. But it's really cool to be part of this, and it's going to be like $20 to actually do the draft. But I want to thank again, if it's too late for this, all the same, Stephen Konefal, I've got these beautiful prize support. I'm staring at it right now that I'll be just passing these things out. In addition to the Gathering Place, the store will be providing prize support as well. So it's well worth your time. Thank you, Stephen. That $20 carries far, I assure you. But if you can take it away, I will figure out how to divvy that out. But in addition to, if you show up and all those are booked up, because again, only seats 8, only seats 8, only seats 8, possibly 10, but we'll figure that out with the Two-Headed Giant. And then I'll just go ahead and bring other cubes too, right? Come hang out with Stu and I. Will be live recording. I wish May could be there. Sorry, May. I would love for you to be there. It would be awesome. But we just want to get together and hang out with you and get your feedback, and would love just to have you on the show and chat about what we do. Other than that, we got, you may have noticed on the Buzzsprout account, if you use that, that's our site. It's ubercube /Buzzsprout. There is a donate button if you want to support the show. I would truly appreciate that. Also, Ubercube is honored to be a affiliate with Ultra Sleeves, and I've talked about this ad nauseum at this point. If you want to bling out your cubes and make them super poppin' fresh and people to stop, and I know we talked about sub games, we don't want to slow the draft down, but I'm telling you, the Ultra Sleeves is rendered by artists, absolutely gorgeous. They're tight fit sleeves that go over, and then you can double sleeve up. Like my Necromancy alone is absolutely gorgeous. You can see that on the site. where I've selected the ones that I own so you can kind of see what they do, and it'll let you slide them up and down so you can see the car before and after. Absolutely in love with this. If you use our code, you get 5% off your purchase. ultrasleeves.com/ubercube. Also, if you want to support the show, we have Inked Gaming as an affiliate as well. And I just ordered, I just sent you the link for it too. If you're interested in getting the Ubercube mat, I can send you the PNG that my kid, who I love very much, has rendered it and made it high res. Absolutely gorgeous. I just ordered one made, by the way. It's coming in the mail. And our good friend Stephen Konefal, again, for all of his support of the show, truly love the gentleman here. Sent him a mat, and he's excited about it, and it's way better than the one I had before. You can also find us at Ubercube MTG Pod. You can reach us at ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. You can link us at you can link us on Discord. If you're interested in joining our Discord is getting really big, isn't it, May?
It is getting pretty big. So why don't you tell us about the Patreon?
Oh, so Patreon. I want to go ahead and do a shout out. We want to give a special shout out. The Patreon at this point, we've had fun with it as we do, right? But I want to give a very special shout out to Samuel McKenna for supporting the show. Thank you, Samuel. If you go by Sam, either way, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for being a listener. May, would you want to give a shout out to Samuel? Say hello.
We appreciate you. Many hearts, and we always appreciate our paid Patreon.
Absolutely. So other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at Ubercube is...
Happy cubing!
Happy cubing!